Charles and Ivanka had been married for a few years. From the outside, they appeared to be a normal couple. Two folks are building a life together. But behind closed doors, things were not as great as they appeared. Their marriage wasn't easy. Arguments had been routine. Some are concerned about minor details, while others are concerned about major issues. But they all seemed to point to the same fact. Their relationship was becoming increasingly strained. Despite everything, Charles deeply loved his wife. He wasn't flawless, but he did his best to secure their future. They had been saving for a house, a desire that Charles clung to like a lifeline. He pictured a future in which they could finally have their own home. However, Ivanka viewed things differently. It began one evening, as any other minor disagreement would. Nearly insignificant. Charles had just arrived home from work, fatigued. "I'm looking forward to a calm evening." But anxiety was already in the air. Ivanka had begged for something, and Charles had informed her that they couldn't afford it at the moment. Ivanka wasn't buying the excuse. And, as always, the disagreement swiftly devolved into something broader, deeper, and far more agonizing. Ivanka's tone was caustic. It's simple for her to make Charles feel like he's always the problem, like he's not doing enough, even when he's giving it his all. "Why do I have to repeat it to you over and over?" She snapped and rolled her eyes. Charles tried to remain cool and steady in his voice. "Ivanka, I'm really trying here, but it seems as if nothing I do is ever enough for you." Ivanka let out a dry, humorless laugh. "Trying? Is that what you call this? Charles, you're not making an effort. This is simply you doing the bare minimum, and expecting me to be appreciative for it." The words cut deeper than she expected. Charles could feel his frustration rising beneath the surface. He reiterated, the bare minimum. He wanted to remind her of what he had done. Long hours, savings, and sacrifices. So, what was the point? Everything would remain the same. Ivanka's condescending attitude hurt the most. She didn't care. Charles felt the patient shudder. He grabbed his keys and walked towards the door. He craved air, distance, anything other than the crushing sensation of never being enough. "I can't do this right now," he said under his breath as he walked away. Ivanka stood there unfazed. He had no notion that this night would change everything. Charles had barely made it down the street when he realized his mistake in hurrying to depart. He had left his wallet and card on the kitchen counter. He turned around and returned home, annoyed at himself but aware that he couldn't go far without it. When he arrived home, he pulled the door open as quietly as possible, not wanting to start another dispute just now. But as soon as he stepped inside, he heard Ivanka's voice. She was on the phone. Initially, he was not paying attention. He was so intent on getting his wallet and leaving that she didn't know he was back. But her words halted him dead in his tracks. "I accept less." A shiver went down his spine. His heartbeat quickened, slamming against his ribs as his fingers hovered over his wallet. "I should have stayed with Declan, but I needed stability." Charles felt as if the air had been drained from the room. She proceeded. "Charles is a good man, but he was not the one I was looking for from the beginning." Charles understood everything at that point, including the fact that her adoration always appeared forced. The disagreements, the frigid distance between them, and the way she constantly appeared to be tolerating their marriage rather than living it. It wasn't only about money. It never was. She also intended to convey emotional meaning. She'd never been as in love with him as he was with her. Charles scooped up his wallet and card from the living room and strolled out, quietly closing the door behind him. The night air felt cold on his skin, but it did little to relieve the stinging pain of what he had just heard. He wasn't sure where he was headed at first. His feet led him through the familiar streets. Eventually, he found himself in a pub. It wasn't one he typically visited, but that didn't matter. He only needed a place to sit, somewhere to reflect and let the reality sink in without fully stifling him. He got a beer, took a drink, and let the bitterness settle on his tongue, but it was nothing compared to the bitterness he felt inside. Ivanka had never really wanted him. He had spent years striving for a future with her, believing that their difficulties were fleeting, that their love, his love, was well worth the cost. However, it had all been meaningless. She had settled, unintentionally trapping him in a marriage based solely on convenience. The idea of confronting her entered his thoughts. So, what was the point? What will he say? That he understood the truth. He had heard every word. She might apologize and perhaps cry. However, this would not change the reality that her heart had never belonged to him. As he peered at the amber liquid in his glass, he came to a calm but drastic choice. He would depart not just for the night or to cool off, but permanently. He would go, leaving no trace of himself in her life, and giving her exactly what she craved, the freedom to be with anyone she truly desired. There was no reason to stay. There was no purpose to struggle for something that had never existed. He ordered another beer, allowing the choice to settle deeply within him. This was the final night he would spend as Ivanka's spouse. By sunrise, he'd be gone. That night, Ivanka slept. Charles sat in the dim glow of his laptop screen. If she wanted to be with another man, he would not stop her, but he also refused to depart empty-handed. He signed into their joint savings account. It was not difficult. He had always been responsible for family finances. The figures stared back at him. They had been saving to purchase a home. He took his 80% share of the money, which he had donated all by himself. Instead of taking cash, he wisely spent the money on resaleable assets, internet electronics, rare collectibles, and expensive objects that could be readily liquidated later. He left nothing to chance. Once the transactions were completed, he deleted any traces of them from his emails, ensuring that Ivanka couldn't track his next steps. Then he switched his focus to the next task with silent efficiency. Charles packed only the essentials, critical documents, and enough clothing to last a while. Anything that might help him rebuild somewhere. He had no intention of carrying anything sentimental. There was nothing here worth clinging to anymore. Before leaving, he sat at his desk and stared at the blank sheet of paper in front of him. He did not need many words. The truth had already been uttered, but not in his face. He took up a pen and wrote with a steady hand. I heard everything. I will not stand in the way of your pleasure. Go settle with your dream companion. There are no accusations. There was no confrontation. Just one final goodbye. By daybreak, Charles had vanished. Ivanka awoke expecting another ordinary morning. Her gaze rested on the note. When she got out of bed, it was on the table, waiting for her. When she read the words, her stomach fell. He knew. When she realized he'd departed, she felt a rush of panic. Not for a couple of hours. Not to chill down, but for good. Worst of all, she had unintentionally pushed him into this situation. Her hands shook as she grabbed her phone, dialed his number, and waited, hoping. However, the line was disconnected. She tried again. And again. Nothing. Her fingers worked rapidly. Opening her email, she sent a short note, but when she pushed send, the response was immediate and undelivered. Her breathing got uneven as she checked social media, scrolling through her contacts and looking for his entirely deleted page. It was as if he had not been there at all. Desperation creeps in. She called his workplace, assuming he might have gone there, but they never answered. Hours of trying later, the receptionist responded, and Ivanka forced her voice to remain steady as she inquired about Charles. The response was casual. Oh, Charles, he resigned this morning. I sent an email before office hours. Ivanka's grasp on the phone tightened almost immediately. He had planned it. This was not a spontaneous response to their argument. He had been deliberate and thoughtful. He had taken the time to remove any traces of himself from her world. He had left, leaving her with only a note and the implications of her words. She had spent so long believing Charles was simply present, but now she is alone in an empty house, staring at the last thing he had ever left for her. She understood she had finally pushed him too far, and there was nothing she could do to reverse the situation. Ivanka, Charles has left you. They no longer had to hide. Secrecy was unnecessary. There's no reason to pretend. She focused her complete attention on Declan. She had considered him her actual choice. All along, the affair, which had previously existed in whispers and stolen moments, was now in the open. There was no husband standing in the way. She felt no guilt. At first, everything seemed to fall into place. Declan said all she needed to hear to make her feel wanted, and to tell her that she had made the correct decision in choosing him. There was passion, energy, and a sense of liberation that she thought Charles could never provide. This was the life she had desired, the life she believed she earned. A few months after Charles departed, Ivanka took the ultimate step to permanently remove him from her life. She filed for divorce, certain that he would never return, because he was nowhere to be found. The court entered a default judgment in her favor. She was legally single and could move forward without looking back. For a while, everything appeared ideal. But as time passed, cracks began to appear. Declan was pleasant, yet he remained distant. He was present in the way that counted the least in words, superficial affection. However, when it came to genuine devotion, he was gone. He avoided serious discussions about the future, usually changing the topic when she brought it up. Then the truth started to emerge. Ivanka found that Declan was not as dedicated to her as she had thought. He continued to entertain other ladies and establish relationships outside of their own. What she thought was a deep, passionate love turned out to be merely a convenient arrangement for him. She had left a man who had given her his all, for someone who had no intention of reciprocating. The comparison started. Things she used to detest about Charles had emerged in a different light. Despite their many disagreements, Charles had always been dependable. And he had been present not only physically but also emotionally. Even when they battled, he remained, fighting for their marriage, and believing in their future. He had given up his comfort, goals, and even his riches to create something lasting with her. Declan, on the other hand, had only provided her with brief moments of thrill. There were no genuine sacrifices, no stability, and no certainty in what they were constructing since. In reality, they had built nothing at all. Then she realized something. She had never really settled for less. She had discarded something real in favor of an illusion. Her relationship with Charles wasn't flawless, but it was sincere. Her relationship with Declan provided her with everything she desired, but it was never intended to last. Years passed. Ivanka was still single. The man she previously thought was her genuine love. Her ideal mate never lived up to her expectations. Declan, the man she believed she should have picked from the beginning, avoided any serious discussion about marriage. When she brought it up, he dismissed it, changed the subject or simply dismissed it. She initially convinced herself that it was just a matter of timing, and that he wasn't ready yet. He would eventually commit to her. She left everything for him. But as the years passed, she found it increasingly difficult to ignore the truth in front of her. Declan was never serious about her. The realization struck like a slow, excruciating trickle. She had left her marriage believing she was choosing true love, but she had become one of his numerous sidekicks whenever they clashed about it. Declan never hesitated to remind her of one thing. "I have never asked you to leave your husband." That statement always got to her. It left her humiliated and enraged. Most importantly, he is regretful because he was correct. He never promised her eternity. He never asked her to step away from Charles. That had been her decision. She'd never be able to reverse her decision. And now, every now and then, she found herself thinking of Charles. Where is he now? Has he moved on? Has he found someone new? Did he build the life they had planned? However, with another lady, these ideas came in waves, sneaking up on her when she least anticipated them. The more she ignored them, the stronger they grew. She had a man who adored her. A man who wished to establish a life with her. And she threw everything away. For someone who never considered her more than an option. So that's the story. So, what can we learn from this? Sometimes we don't appreciate what we have until it's gone. It's easy to dismiss the efforts of someone who genuinely cares, only to regret it after they're gone. People often pursue what they believe they desire. They believe that something or someone better is waiting for them. However, they eventually learn that they have everything they needed all along. Words hold power. What we say about our relationships, particularly when we believe they aren't listening, can either strengthen or destroy a relationship. Love is more than just emotions and excitement. It's all about trust, respect, and true companionship. If certain qualities are lacking, no amount of desire can compensate. If you don't appreciate someone's presence, you may have to cope with their departure. Charles went away. Not out of rage, but because he realized that remaining in a place where he wasn't truly wanted would only lead to further pain. Some people believe in fighting for love regardless of the circumstances. Others know when to let go. So what do you think? Do you think Charles made the correct decision to leave? Should he have stayed to fight for his marriage? Here's the next story. Gray Penner was reading page 120 of his new novel, Clive Cussler, when he heard his wife's car pull into the garage. He checked his fitness watch and saw the time, 8:17 p.m. He frowned. For the third time this week, his wife had worked late. 4 months ago. She had never arrived home late throughout their 7-year marriage. Gray was not born yesterday. Kelly called the first several times to explain she was going to be delayed. He didn't think much of it. Then he started noticing small details. When she returned home later than usual one evening, her lipstick had become somewhat smudged. Kelly's obsession with her attractiveness was unusual. He was also certain he smelled someone else's aftershave. As she leaned in to kiss him. That night in bed, he pressed close to her neck and stroked her from behind, hoping to confirm what he believed he had noticed. He wasn't very knowledgeable about perfumes, but he could tell there was a big difference between the perfume he got her and whatever she smelled like. Now. Damn. Gray almost gasped as his red-haired wife walked through the door. He still thought she was stunning at 30 as he had when he first met her in college. And his customary reaction was an almost instinctive rapid intake of breath. Every time he saw her, after being separated for a few hours or longer, Kelly grinned to herself as she entered the house, taking note of her husband's normal reaction. She knew it was a genuine praise, and she had to admit she really loved it. It thrilled her that her spouse still thought she was attractive, even after she had kissed another man's lips. "Hello, sweetie," she whispered, leaning closer to him, kissing him on the lips before turning to head upstairs. Invisible smile was currently both confident and contemptuous. "Make yourself comfy. I'll get down in a minute." Gray didn't say anything as his wife walked into the house and up the stairs, and she didn't seem to notice. He couldn't ignore the now familiar smell of aftershave. It wasn't the first time he'd observed it, but she was climbing the stairs. He furrowed his brow, a feeling of discomfort washing over him. He could feel the looming confrontation, which he knew had to happen soon if he wanted to save their marriage. Gray was confident that his wife had not yet crossed the line in her relationship with Mr. Handsome Paco Rabanne, as he privately referred to her potential seducer. However, he believed she was getting dangerously near. Gray had dreaded for 7 years that his stunning bride would one day realize she had married a guy she thought was unworthy of her, at least from an aesthetic standpoint, and had attempted to correct the issue. Gray didn't consider himself unattractive, but he thought his looks were average and knew he couldn't compete with his breathtakingly gorgeous wife. The snake that had slithered into the region was called John von Bergman. Kelly worked as an assistant to the vice president of an international telecommunications business. Johan, a well-built 40-year-old blonde, had moved from the company's headquarters in the Netherlands around 6 months earlier. For the first 2 weeks following his arrival, Gray had heard more about the Dutch visitor than he wanted to, before Kelly abruptly stopped mentioning him. That's when Gray's suspicions started. "Hey, is the new Dutch guy still working in your office?" Gray inquired one evening after supper, as Kelly discussed her day. "Yes. Why are you asking?" she replied, sounding a little nervous. "For a few weeks, he was all you spoke about." Gray added that he now seemed to have vanished totally. "He now works in another department. We rarely see each other," she explained, her face flushing slightly. Gray murmured, stuffing his lips with food and realizing that his wife had just lied to him. When the late evenings arrived, Kelly felt an immediate physical attraction to the Dutchman, who stood 193 m tall and weighed 102 kg. His presence drew her in from the moment they met. Aside from his physical attractiveness, he emanated confidence that bordered on arrogance. He knew 3 languages and had dark blue eyes that, in Kelly's opinion, seemed to stare directly into her soul every time he looked at her. To be honest, she had to admit that when they initially smiled at her, she felt a noticeable strain in her abdomen. Kelly and Johansson did not work in distinct divisions, and they constantly communicated about work issues. Within a few weeks of Johan entering the organization, they'd started going to lunch together. Kelly adored her husband, and never considered that she and Johan might be forming a connection. Johan, on the other hand, was completely aware of what was happening. He gently nudged their connection along, carefully directing events in his advantage. Johan knew this woman was married, but he felt she would inform him if he went too far in his nation. Extramarital relationships were not condemned. 2 weeks later, they were still working on an unfinished job. At the end of the day, Johan advised that they either resume their job in the morning or devote some more time to it. That evening in the office, her smile said everything he needed to know. She instantly called Gray at his workplace and informed him that she would be staying late for a few hours. Gray mentioned that this was the first time she had stayed late in her entire career at the company. But since he had to work late sometimes, he didn't complain and said he would make supper that evening. She admired his thoughtfulness. They departed the office around 7 p.m., despite having completed their work by around 6:30. Both had been keeping track of time. Late-night work, or rather remaining late at the office, became a habit for the couple, who originally spent their time conversing. It eventually developed into touches, embraces, and kisses. Kelly was fully aware that she was on the verge of a dangerous slope, but she liked the thought of having both a spouse and a boyfriend. In actuality, she was so caught up in her feelings that she either didn't notice or didn't care that her husband was becoming aware of what was going on. Grace landed a solid job with decent pay at a small local telecom company after graduating from college. Kelly, who had the same educational background as Gray, began in a lower-level position, but at an international corporation. They had vowed not to have children until they were 30. They also determined that Kelly would be the first to return to online education to pursue an MBA and boost her career at her employer. Once she finished her degree, it was Gray's turn to obtain his own master's degree to advance in his work. Kelly completed her master's degree in 4 years and was quickly promoted, resulting in a greater pay and position than her spouse. Graham is incredibly proud of his wife and glad that their professional growth plan is working. Kelly became preoccupied with her own financial and personal achievements, losing sight of their joint marital objective. It was Gray's turn to obtain his master's degree. She advised that they utilize the money to buy a home where they could raise their children. Gray was disappointed that his goals were no longer a priority, but he had to concede that buying a house for their future family was a smart decision. "You may always return to college in a few years," she told him. Kelly always came up with something meaningful for the pair to spend their money on. Aside from Green's MBA, he did not want to appear selfish, so he always agreed with her priorities. Kelly's ego enjoyed being the primary breadwinner and having the more prestigious position in their relationship. She came to regard herself as more equal to two alleged equals. As Kelly descended the stairs, butterflies flew around in her tummy. She loved her husband, but she also needed Johan. She needed to feel him so she could spend evenings with him and rub against him after sex. However, she couldn't betray her husband. To avoid betrayal, she had to tell him first. She knew Green loved her as much as she loved him, and he would allow her to have sex outside of their marriage for one weekend. After all, he hadn't denied her anything. Dinner is in the microwave. Grace responded. You just need to heat it for a minute, as Kelly arrived downstairs. Thank you, darling. I'll get it now. Can we speak? She asked. Gray glanced up from his reading. Dirk Pitt would need to wait. He could see Kelly wanted to say something significant. Could this be related to what? What did he plan to discuss with her? Hi, I'd like a free pass for this weekend. Gray, Kelly whispered cautiously, but Gray remained motionless on the couch. His thoughts began operating in stops and starts. He prayed. He did not appear as surprised as he felt. It appeared that his insides were trying to escape. Sorry. He inquired, thinking he had indeed heard his wife right. I need to spend the entire weekend with you on Wakeman, she said. We have feelings that should only be explored once. I love you, Gray, not him. And after this weekend, I'll come back to you and spend the rest of my life showing you how much I adore you. Gray felt even more uncomfortable as he realized Kelly's question had just ended their marriage. Nonetheless, he resolved to see the tragedy through to the very finish. What if, after this weekend, you decide that once isn't sufficient? What if you find you'll need him for more than one weekend? What if you decide you need him more than I do? That will not happen. I promise. She replied quickly. Really? And how do you make such a promise? 7 years ago, you promised me. You promised that you would leave everyone else for me. And now you're willing to break that vow so quickly. She blushed again and looked away from him. She said, I need this, Gray, and I know you love me enough to give it to me. To be precise. Kelly, you do not need this. You want it, and you're hoping I'll be foolish enough to give it to you. That's not going to happen, he insisted firmly. But you aren't my property. So, if you really want to, you can do it. Just remember that every action has an equal and opposite reaction. Thank you, Gray. I'm pleased you understand, Kelly said. No, darling, don't pretend you misunderstood me. I just stated that you should do whatever you believe is appropriate for you. Then I will do what I believe is best for me, he responded. She said, when you walk through the door, do whatever you want. Kelly sipped coffee at the kitchen table the following evening. As he entered, he spotted a tiny bag sitting near the door. He saw she was wearing one of her most alluring dresses, a cornflower blue number with a plunging neckline that revealed considerable cleavage. Grace responded, laying his keys and wallet on the shelf. You appear to be quite self-assured. She offered him a cheeky smile. I am confident in my dear hubby, she added softly. He raised an eyebrow. Now kiss me goodnight and have a lovely weekend. Don't sulk, she said. Gray was compelled to seize her by the arms and shake her till her skull fell off. Instead, he gave her the saddest look he could conjure before shaking his head. God, how much I loved you, baby, he said before turning and heading upstairs. Kelly recognized Gray hadn't kissed her goodbye, but she didn't think much about the fact that he used the past tense to express love. Her thoughts were already miles away, where Johan was impatiently anticipating her arrival. She felt like a 16-year-old girl preparing for her first prom. Kelly and Johan had been preparing their weekend for the previous 2 weeks. After 3 months of increasingly frequent kisses and touches, they decided it was time to see where their relationship could go. Johan didn't mind Kelly being married. She had told him that she and her spouse were working through some challenges in their marriage. She met Johan in the hotel foyer, where they checked in as Mr. and Mrs. Johan Wakeman. They went up to their room and dropped off their belongings. Before leaving, Johan asked Kelly to turn around for him. He responded with a faint whistle before pulling her in for a deep, passionate kiss. She moaned profoundly. God, this man can kiss. She assumed the table at the premium steakhouse was reserved for 7 in the evening, so they had to unpack fast and go. Dinner was great. They each had a bottle of great wine, but only one since they both wanted to be at their peak for dessert. They each ordered ice cream during the meal. They spoke in quiet tones, enjoying each other's company. They exchanged soft touches and appeared to be a passionately in love married couple back at Gray's house. The snack table behind his recliner included the remnants of a medium pepperoni pizza and 4 empty beer bottles. Gray, while being a very excellent cook, had not considered preparing anything that evening. After some consideration, He decided that pizza and beer would be the ideal supper for a night when his wife was giving her body to another guy. After eating his dinner, Gray went upstairs to his bedroom with several large waste bags. He spent the next 30 minutes hastily packing Kelly's clothes into the bags. Then he carried them downstairs and left them by the front door. He took slightly more care with her jewels and toiletries, placing them into a box that he also placed near the entrance. Somewhat satisfied, yet still inexplicably furious, Gray returned downstairs, slipped a DVD into the player, and settled in to watch his all-time favorite film, Mel Brooks' Young Frankenstein. Meanwhile, Kelly and Johan had just returned to their hotel room when Johan mashed his lips against hers. She placed her arms around his neck and stood there for nearly a minute, kissing passionately in the process. Kelly leaned down and ran her fingers over Johan's slacks, which she had done several times in the previous 2 weeks based on what she had seen through his sweatpants in the office. Kelly assumed Johan was slightly larger than her husband, especially given Johan's total height advantage. He was 15 cm taller and weighed 18 kg more than her husband. Kelly's and Johan's connection grew deeper as they stood together in their room. Kelly reached out gingerly, her hands quivering slightly as she assisted Johan with the belt. The atmosphere was packed with expectancy, and she felt a mix of nervousness and excitement as they got closer. Kelly noticed small things about your home that she had previously overlooked. Her thoughts wandered briefly, comparing new experiences to familiar ones, but she immediately allowed herself to be dragged back into the present. As they moved together, they became more attuned to each other's rhythms and cues. Johan took the lead, and Kelly tried to match his pace while remaining present in the moment. Every touch and movement conveyed a sense of discovery, an exploration of something new and exciting. Though their initial connection did not fully meet Kelly's expectations, Johan was kind and complimentary as they lay together later, their hands entwined. She told herself that they still had plenty of time to explore this new chapter and achieve the peace she sought. After a 20-minute pause, Kelly attempted to rekindle her partner's enthusiasm, knowing that her spouse occasionally needed that much time to get back into the game. Once again, she was disappointed. Johan's instrument did not get the hint. "Give me a few more minutes, and we'll go for another round," he added. "Could you? Maybe you know," Kelly asked hesitantly. Johan stared at her, as if she had asked him to eat something awful. She rarely had to beg her husband to do something nice for her. Gray was always eager to do it, and Kelly knew he was quite good at it. "I am all right, but could you perhaps take a brief shower first?" Johan asked. Kelly reluctantly got out of bed and headed to the shower. When Kelly returned to the room, Johan had already fallen asleep. She considered simply lying down and going to sleep, but she was overcome with emotion. She coughed softly to awaken him. Johan gradually opened his eyes, and their gazes connected. Kelly promised herself that she would not compare Johan to Gray this weekend, citing the fact that her spouse could not be matched, in part because Johan was new and unique, not to mention the fact that their connection was beneficial. Nonetheless, she had to confess that Johan as a lover couldn't compete with her husband. Kelly eventually got some satisfaction after a few uninteresting minutes, and it required considerably more work than she could recall. Kelly considered this seriously. The following day, Saturday, the pair planned a full day of outdoor activities, followed by another luxury dinner and later personal delights. Kelly hoped that the previous evening was a one-off. Gray spent the entire Saturday alone, not even turning on the television until the sun set. No matter how he assessed his situation, he couldn't see any way to stay married to his wife. He knew he still loved her. Love doesn't go away overnight, but he couldn't accept the disrespect she had lately shown him. He'd never be able to trust her again, convinced that any time she wanted another man, she'd demand another free pass. A replay of the television series, Leave It to Beaver, was playing on the screen in front of him, although it could have been a more mature film if Gray had preferred. Was there? He took another gulp of beer and looked straight ahead, his thoughts returning to happier times with Kelly. To be honest, Gray never understood how they ended up together as classmates. They had taken several of the same courses at Arizona State University the same year, but Green had no idea this beautiful girl recognized who he was. She always appeared to have a tiny circle of admirers, but at the start of their freshman year, she took a seat next to him in their accounting class. She seemed to go out of her way to flirt with him in class, much to his surprise. She invited him out for coffee after one of their sessions had concluded. Of course, the young man enthusiastically consented. They were practically inseparable for the rest of their college years, and married approximately 6 months after graduation, which was only a few months ago. Gray was positive the romance would endure a lifetime. However, recent events have shown fractures in their marriage. Then Kelly did the unthinkable. Kelly lay in bed next to the sleeping union, thinking how much effort it would take to persuade her husband to forgive her for the poorly timed weekend. She could still hear what her husband had said when she informed him about her desire for a hall pass. But she knew Gray loved her too much to let a single weekend ruin their marriage. Still, she never anticipated being concerned about her husband when she was with Johan. They had intercourse twice on Saturday evening, following a wonderful day in the city. The day spent with Johan had been fantastic. He has immaculate manners and an amazing personal charisma. But when they returned to the hotel room for the second night, his attractiveness appeared to fade once more. He was selfish and clumsy, despite the fact that she was giving him another opportunity to prove himself. She would not have even referred to what they performed as intercourse. Yes, Johan tried to be physically active, but it felt more like the mechanical motion of a saw moving back and forth than anything else. She thought he didn't care about his partner's experience, which made me upset. Perfect for this. She thought to herself, God, what a fool I am. Johan and Miss S. Wegman were all smiles when they checked out of the hotel after showering and enjoying a late breakfast. The whole time, Kelly stayed courteous and smiled. They exchanged passionate kisses in the parking lot. Kelly utilized the hour-long drive home to clear her mind and bolster her position in her ongoing fight with her husband over her entire previous arrangement. She was convinced that Gray would eventually give up, despite his initial rage and threats. After all, she almost always escaped. Worst-case scenario, she reasoned, I'll order some sexy lingerie, stilettos, and possibly even a leather corset. She couldn't help but smile at the notion of how effortlessly she could wrap a man around her finger. Kelly pulled into the garage and turned off the engine. She checked her makeup in the rearview mirror one final time, got her bag from the back seat, took a big breath, and strode into the house with a proud expression. Hey, I'm home, she cried out as she walked into the kitchen from the garage. She waited a few seconds, anticipating Gray to welcome her, which would have been very typical, but was struck with disappointment. Hearing the huge screen in the living room, she walked in, drawn by her husband's juvenile antics. Gray was seated in his recliner, watching a baseball game. He cast a fleeting glance at her, nodded in her direction, and then returned his focus to the television. Needless to say, she was displeased. So that's how you plan to play this? Fine, she huffed and pouted as she exited the room. What the hell? What on earth are all these bags near the front entrance meant to mean? She shouted. When Gray didn't react, Kelly approached and opened one of the bags. He heard her gasp, followed by the sound of more bags being unzipped. Damn it. This is not humorous. Gray, what the hell are you doing? She yelled. To make it easier for you to move out when I bring you the divorce papers, he said, shocking her as he approached her almost silently from behind. There won't be a divorce. She said, no divorce, you idiot. We talked about it. It was only one weekend. 1. We have been married for 7 years. You may give me a weekend. First and foremost, we did not talk. You talked, and I listened. You informed me that you were taking a hall pass to sleep with someone else. When it was my turn to speak, I told you I was not okay with it. Not my problem. If you did not take me seriously. We are married. That means no hall passes ever. Gray stated strongly. Are you really intending to divorce me in just one weekend? Out of all the time we've spent together and all the time we might have in the future? She asked. Panic was creeping into her voice. We do not have a future together anymore. Not after everything you did. I've told you this. Which part of I'll do what I need to do? Didn't you understand? Gray gave a growl. Kelly shed tears, possibly for the first time in their marriage. Gray did not come closer to console her. You cheated on me with another man. Just because you informed me beforehand does not make it any less of a betrayal, especially after I warned you not to do it. Gray stated. You did not tell me not to do it. You stated I could make my own decision. She added, attempting to shift the argument in her favor and accept responsibility for the repercussions of her actions. It's funny how you just remember what suits you. Graham responded. Kelly stood still for a few seconds, staring at her stuff, which were packed in suitcases. Her breathing was labored. I'm not moving out. She answered. This is also my house. Fine. But since your belongings are already packed, you can move them into the guest room. I am staying in the master bedroom, Grace said. Fine, she mumbled as she carried the suitcases up the staircase. Will you help me? He said. I've already done my part. I packed the items. Graham returned to the living room to continue watching the baseball game. He could hear his wife storming up the stairs while muttering to herself. Kelly eventually returned downstairs and settled onto the couch in the living area. She took the Sunday newspaper that Gray had left on the side table near her normal location and began flicking through it noisily, making sure the pages crunched every time she moved one. or shifted her position. "Aren't you going to ask how my weekend was?" She pouted. "Why should I? I presume you had sex with him several times." I touched him. "Isn't this what adulterers do when they cheat on their spouses?" Gray asked. "We also went places, did things, and dined at some wonderful restaurants." She whined. "Lovely. Good for you." Gray stated. "Perhaps one of your friends will be interested. However, your hubby is not present at the moment." Gray saw that his wife didn't appear as excited as he had expected, especially after her initial announcement about her vacation. The fact that she wanted to chat about things other than sex indicated that you may have been more of a letdown than a stallion. "But this isn't my problem." Gray had a thought. Green spent Monday dividing their bank accounts and arranging financial arrangements for the upcoming divorce. His appointment with the family law attorney he had chosen was not until the following week, so he realized he'd have to live with Kelly in the same house for some time. Kelly, meanwhile, had spent the day avoiding Johan. She was well aware that their assessments of the weekend's success were at opposing ends of the spectrum. She realized their relationship had been forever changed, and not for the better. She really wanted her husband to notice this and return to her so that, with Gray's assistance, she could fend off Johan's future approaches. Kelly's life had suddenly become extremely complicated. Kelly was considering what to do. Talk to Gray again, or simply continue as if nothing had happened. She hoped her spouse would soon calm down. She chose the latter because it presented the least amount of resistance. She does not want to be termed an adulteress by her husband again. After studying the situation from every viewpoint, Kelly was compelled to agree that the term adulteress was far more accurate than loving wife. She shook her head sadly, wondering if she would see the situation differently. If a weekend had been a resounding success rather than a disastrous failure, Gray did not say anything to Kelly when he returned from work, or when they sat down to eat. After finishing his lunch, he said a quick thank you and cleared his dish. "I am sorry, Gray." Kelly whined as Gray walked to the living room. "After all these years, I assumed you loved me enough to give me one weekend." Gray said, "I love you enough. I would have expected so after all these years. You love me enough not to seek permission to become an adulteress. How selfish and deluded can you be?" The next day at work, Kelly's situation worsened just 5 minutes after she arrived at her workplace. One of her best pals in the firm walked in and shut the door. A rare incident at their workplace. "Please tell me you didn't spend your weekend sleeping with Dutch store MLA. Sal," half murmured. Kelly's eyes widened in shock, despite the fact that the door was closed. Was he bragging? No. No. She croaked, her face distorted with humiliation and wrath. Emma remarked, "I assumed that if it didn't come from you, it was from him. But I did not hear it from him. I overheard a couple of girls gossiping about it in the break room, as I was drinking coffee. If they start chatting at 8 a.m., the entire office will be talking about it by lunchtime. There's no denying it now." Kelly lowered her head into her hands. Emma watched tears fall across her desk. "Yep. You've officially become the adulteress that every woman despises, and every man desires. So, how was it? Was it worthwhile?" she asked, lifting her brow. "That's the biggest issue." "It wasn't," Kelly explained. "I've greatly irritated my hubby. And for what? Johan is tall, gorgeous, personable, and a complete failure in bed. He's slightly bigger than Gray and not nearly as manly in bed. But he believes he is God's gift to women." Emma's astonished face changed to one of concern. "So, how many favors will it take to win back your husband?" Emma inquired coldly. Kelly said, "I just wish it was that simple. Gray hasn't stopped talking about divorce after 7 years of being together. Straight up. No, I will think about it. Is there no counseling?" "Nothing. I assumed he'd just get mad. But he is totally enraged. I've never seen him so irrational. I warned him." "Yes, but if he didn't approve, your warning is ineffective. You're a bright woman. You can't honestly say you didn't know how this would end." Emma stated that Gray spoke almost the same words to Kelly 2 weeks later, when she called him in tears after being served with divorce papers at the office. "You said I could sleep with him. You said I could." She sobbed into her phone. "No, I told you it was your decision, but it would have consequences. I did not give you permission to sleep with that blonde bastard. You got exactly what you wanted. And plainly, what I desired didn't matter," Gray stated firmly. A few weeks later, Gray received a call from his father and mother-in-law, who asked him to speak with their daughter and contemplate reconciliation. Gray adored his in-laws and had always gotten along with them, so he tried to let them down gently. She stated she made a mistake, and you won't speak to her. You will not even let her explain. His father-in-law accused him harshly. "You are better than this, Gray. She made an error." "Is that exactly how she put it?" Graham responded, his voice full of cynicism. "Well, she hasn't informed us what the error was. But after 7 years, don't you think you owe her some courtesy? Ken Clayton asked. She did not tell you the full story, Ken. I wouldn't say it was a mistake that she allowed herself to spend the weekend sleeping with a coworker. Gray stated, I warned her there would be consequences. Oh, no. No. Ken said, his voice shaking. She couldn't have been that foolish. Gray did not feel compelled to respond to what he assumed was a rhetorical statement. I'm very sorry, Ken said. I'm not sure what more to say. I will not disturb you again. The day after, he spoke with her father. Gray groaned when he saw Kelly's name appear on his phone. He expected more whining. I'm sorry my father called you Gray. I think you figured out that I wasn't exactly open with my folks. I mean, you don't confess until it's necessary. She added gently, I never expected him to call, and I never expected you to let me out. I didn't let you leave. I told her the truth, and she responded flatly. Yeah. She exhaled. Kelly and her lawyer attempted to postpone the divorce, but because Gray had filed on the basis of irreconcilable differences, and there were no children involved, it was finalized after 9 months. Kelly couldn't believe Gray hadn't given her another chance after what she frequently referred to as her mistake. The error wasn't simply sleeping with another man, Kelly, he explained one evening when she tried to persuade him. Long before you cheated on him, you had an emotional affair. You neglected my feelings. You disrespected me in the worst way conceivable. When did you cease loving me? Kelly held back her tears. Gray used to try to console her when she wept. He now accused her of using tears to manipulate her way back into his heart. I know you still love me, Gray. Why can't we strive to reconcile? She asked. Yes, I still love you. That's why it aches so badly, Gray responded. But I don't think you love me as much as I do. I'd never contemplate cheating on you. Never. But I can't think you wouldn't do it again if another man piqued your interest. There will be no second man, I vow. She intervened fast. Gray mumbled. There shouldn't have been a first. You made that pledge when you exchanged vows. Oh, right, she whispered. During the divorce procedures, Johan and a few other co-workers asked Kelly out on multiple occasions. Being dubbed an adulteress had made her the target of office rumor. A few weeks after the incident, she was summoned to HR. We don't have a policy against employees dating, but we always advise our employees to use discretion. When half the males are talking about how you spent a weekend playing house with Johan Wakeman, and half the women are predicting who's next on your list, this is not a nice appearance. If the buzz doesn't subside, you may be asked to transfer to another office. I've heard Maine is wonderful this time of year. According to the HR director, Johan met Kelly again the next day and asked her out on a date. Following a warning from the HR director, she was in no mood. Come on, baby. Your husband is divorcing you. We wouldn't even have to leave town for the weekend, Johan explained. Don't you get the hint? She snapped. I ruined my marriage over poor sex. I didn't need substandard sex. I was such a fool. Now, leave. Kelly shouted. 2 weeks later, Kelly decided to transfer to North Carolina. By the time she departed, everyone at the company realized Johan wasn't the stud he claimed to be. A month later, Johan returned to the Amsterdam office. He was attractive, fit, and walked through the grocery store aisles every Saturday morning like an absent-minded heir. She had noted from a few meters away that he appeared to never notice her, which had become the standard in her life. Margaret Scanlon, known as Peggy to her close friends, was a fifth-grade teacher at the local primary school. Her beauty was mediocre, and her build was what she considered average, so she thought she had nothing to offer the gorgeous, supposedly unmarried man. She was 29, and in just a few weeks, she'd turned 30 with no imminent plans to leave her single life behind. Peggy marveled at how such a handsome man could still be alone. He appeared to be around 30. He did not come across as a player. Instead, he appeared lost, perhaps even broken. Gray Penner did not wear a wedding ring on his left hand, but Peggy knew he was single even before she looked at his hand. The items in his shopping basket revealed all she needed to know about his marital status. Pop-Tarts, frozen pizza, mac and cheese, beer, and grillable meat. Nothing says bachelorhood or possibly divorce quite like those products. Many people referred to Peggy as a mouse. She had short, wavy, light brown hair, wide brown eyes, and fair, nearly pale skin. She stood around 5 feet and 5 inches tall, with a medium-sized bust and nice legs. Personality-wise, she would characterize herself as quiet. In college, her friends thought she was the ideal partner, nice, faithful, and unassuming in appearance. She first observed this man while walking past him several months ago. For some reason, she couldn't explain. She kept observing him, and approximately 2 months ago, she began to pay him more attention. Though it was completely out of character for her, She had been thinking about introducing herself to him. If only. I understand that this may seem a little forward, but I am Peggy Scanlon. Would you like to drink some coffee with me? Peggy asked a few weeks later, approaching the man. Gray moved back and took a close look at the woman who had just spoken to him. She wasn't as lovely as Kelly. Few women were, but something in her expression prompted him to say yes. Something in her eyes compelled him to learn more about this enigmatic woman. For the first time in 2 years, he looked at a lady with more than just polite curiosity. Gray enthusiastically said, "Yes, I think that would be great." Peggy Scanlon was an open book. More importantly, she was easy to read. At 29, she hadn't gone on many dates and had never been in a significant relationship. She appeared clever and well-read, and Gray listened closely as she discussed her past. After she finished, she sat silently, waiting for him to tell his story. She glanced into his eyes and concluded that he was single, because he was divorced. His stare was filled with agony, the type that only someone who had been truly hurt could understand. She observed him while he reflected, noting how he appeared to consider how much of himself to share. In the end, he told her virtually the entire narrative, while she sat completely attentive and engaged. When he finished, they both sat silently. He let out a deep breath and gazed at her as if a huge weight had been lifted off her shoulders. "I apologize for unloading all of that on you," he continued, looking up. "You are the first person I have shared the complete tale with. People have informed me that I have this influence on them. I'm also good with little children and dogs," she added with a smile. Gray chuckled. He felt very at ease with this stranger, nearly as much as he did with Kelly before things broke apart and they parted ways. Gray scheduled a date for the following Friday evening. On their third date, they had their first sexual encounter. Peggy attempted to resist for longer but was unable to do so. She couldn't take the grace, calm, and serene manner. It was really sensuous. Gray invited Peggy to his apartment for coffee and a drink after a delightful meal at a Hungarian restaurant. Despite the fact that he never made any overt sexual advances, they initially sat together on a love seat in the living room, but Peggy quickly leaned in and placed her lips to Gray's. 10 minutes later, they were lying naked in his bedroom. He buried his face in her, and she let out inarticulate sobs before feeling the most intense pleasure of her life. The sensations caused her body to twitch for over a minute. Gray then stepped up and spent the next hour making delicate love with her. He reminded himself that for the first time since his divorce, he was actually making love with others. It had only been sex when they were together. He made a point of kissing her frequently. "You know what? You." She mumbled and snuggled against him after they finished. "Sure. It is all right. We'll have plenty of time to speak later. What will you do over the next few decades?" He observed with a gentle smile. Peggy offered him a tired smile, and he softly placed his lips on hers. The woman, who had served as a bridesmaid 4 times, became the center of attention a year later when she married. They eventually had 2 children, 1 boy. 2 years after their marriage, they had a girl. Unlike her predecessor, Peggy never forgot her promises, though Gray would never know. Kelly also never forgot what she learned a few years after arriving in North Carolina. She remarried and was faithful to her second husband for 15 years, until catching him cheating. She admitted to herself that she finally understood Gray's sorrow and quickly divorced her second husband. Kelly had always taken care of herself, and she continued to go to the gym regularly. She remained an attractive lady at 50, despite being unmarried, single, and approaching the age of 50. Even in her wildest thoughts, she had never imagined this scenario. Kelly's second husband was 10 years older, childless, and hesitant to have children with her. Now it was too late. While she knew there were plenty of 30-year-old guys willing to help her have a kid, none of them wanted to stay and be anything more than a donor. She laughed aloud, sounding more like a book than anything else. Gray wanted 2 children. She'd wanted 3. By now, their 3 children would be teenagers. She and Gray would have attended a variety of school and community events together, including sports games, musical performances, and parent-teacher conferences. Graduations weren't far away. High school and college, followed by weddings and grandchildren. All of that was for mediocre sex. What a fool she'd been. She shook her head sadly, perhaps for the 1000th time. If she was flexible enough, she would have kicked her own buttocks. A few months later, on the other side of the country, Gray and Peggy Penner sat in the gymnasium of the local high school with their son Reggie, watching as their daughter Phyllis graduated. Peggy clutched her husband's hand, and they exchanged a pleasant, tear-filled expression. Gray moved over and gave his wife a brief kiss on the lips, making their kid blush with adolescent shame. "Stop, you two. Not here. Not now," he grumbled. The parents grinned at him and then at each other, arching their eyebrows in playful defiance. Thank you for listening.